On my wedding day, my sister threw champagne, smashed the cake, and yelled, "This is what you get for acting like you're better." Mom hugged her. "She just needs to let it out." I said nothing. "Just look at them." That night, I did what no one expected, pulled her tuition deposit and froze the co-signed lease. In the morning, they got the real news. August 3rd was supposed to be the culmination of everything I'd worked for. 43 guests, soft jazz floating through the evening air, Edison bulbs casting that perfect warm glow everyone pins on Pinterest. Emily looked like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale, and for once, just once, I felt like I deserved to be happy without apologizing for it. I'd clawed my way to this moment. Years of consulting gigs that paid peanuts, sleeping on airport benches between flights, living off vending machine dinners and sheer determination. The kind of grinding hustle that either breaks you or builds you into something unrecognizable. I chose the latter, and finally, I had something to show for it. Bethany saw it differently. She arrived 40 minutes late, long after the ceremony had concluded and our guests were settling into the reception. The gold backless dress she wore screamed, "Look at me," in a way that felt deliberate, calculated. She didn't offer congratulations, didn't smile, didn't even make eye contact. Instead, she claimed a glass of champagne and positioned herself in the corner like a storm cloud waiting for the right atmospheric pressure. I caught her gaze once across the room. She looked through me like I was a stranger, like we hadn't shared a childhood, like I hadn't been the one answering her crisis calls for the past 5 years. Anyone else might have chalked it up to typical Bethany moodiness, but I knew better. That particular silence was never random. It was strategic. 3 weeks earlier, she'd called me sobbing about her car breaking down. Again. This was after I'd already lent her $1,200 in April for the last automotive emergency. This time, she needed an entirely new vehicle, and the urgency in her voice suggested the world would end if I didn't wire money immediately. I said no. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because I was exhausted from being her perpetual safety net. The truth was, Bethany had stopped even pretending to try. She was skipping classes, partying with people who could have been her parents, and spinning elaborate stories to our family about finding herself that somehow always required my financial backing. When I held firm on the car situation, she hung up without a goodbye. I foolishly hoped that would be the end of it. I should have known better. Bethany never let anything go. She just let it ferment until it became something stronger and more destructive. She waited for the toast. The perfect moment when I stood to thank our guests, to talk about love and partnership and the future Emily and I were building together. Bethany stood too, and for a split second, I thought she might actually say something kind. My champagne glass was halfway to my lips when she launched hers like a missile. The glass exploded against the dessert table in a shower of crystal and Dom Perignon, taking out a framed photo of Emily and me from our trip to Maui. Before anyone could process what was happening, Bethany lunged for the wedding cake, 3 tiers of vanilla bean and lavender, handcrafted sugar flowers, 4 hours of a baker's artistry, and shoved it like she was flipping a table in a bar fight. The cake didn't just fall. It imploded. Delicate fondant work and custom decorations smeared across the hardwood floor in an abstract painting of destruction and humiliation. Then she looked directly at me, her voice cutting through the shocked silence like a blade. "This is what you get for acting like you're better than everyone else." The quiet that followed was deafening. Someone's phone buzzed in the distance. A few guests glanced around hopefully, wondering if this might be some elaborate performance art or a prank gone wrong. It wasn't. The DJ had stopped the music. Even the catering staff froze with serving trays suspended mid-air. My mother materialized beside Bethany faster than I'd ever seen her move, wrapping her arms around my sister like she was the victim of some terrible accident. "She just needs to let it out," Mom whispered, loud enough for half the room to hear. "She's been holding so much in." Emily's parents stared at me with a mixture of confusion and concern. My best man looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. Even the photographer lowered his camera, apparently deciding this wasn't a moment worth preserving. Bethany didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She didn't show even a flicker of remorse. She simply walked out like she'd accomplished exactly what she came to do, leaving behind the wreckage of what was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. I didn't say a word. Not because I didn't have plenty to say, but because I knew this wasn't the venue for it. I wasn't going to let Bethany turn my wedding reception into her personal courtroom. I smiled at Emily, whispered something reassuring to our closer friends, and signaled the coordinator to keep things moving. The evening limped forward like a wounded animal. Some people danced, others made valiant attempts at normal conversation, but the damage was done. The memory was permanently stained, and everyone knew it. At home that night, Emily was unusually quiet as she carefully hung up her dress. She asked if I was okay, and I told her I was fine. It wasn't entirely true, but I was focused on something else, something I'd been planning since the moment Bethany walked out. While Emily brushed her teeth, I opened my laptop. First, I logged into the university portal and revoked the $9,400 tuition deposit I'd paid for Bethany's fall semester just 2 months prior. Gone with 3 clicks. Then I navigated to the rental management system for the apartment lease I'd co-signed. I locked the account, marked it for review, and froze all payment approvals. Her rent was due in 5 days, and suddenly, she had no way to access the funds. At exactly 8:40 the next morning, my phone rang. Bethany's name flashed on the screen, but I didn't answer. The texts started immediately. What the hell happened to the portal? Why can't I access my account? Did you seriously do this? I didn't respond. By the 6th message, she'd dropped the confused victim act. The final text was just 2 words, "Fix this." I muted my phone and made coffee. I didn't tell Emily immediately, not because I was hiding anything, but because I wanted to savor the silence. For the first time in years, I'd stopped being Bethany's automatic solution to every self-created crisis. Around noon, my mother called. I let it ring through to voicemail. "Your sister is very upset. She feels abandoned. Call me back." The irony was breathtaking. Bethany hadn't felt abandoned when I co-signed her lease, or when I paid her security deposit, or when I covered her overdraft fees, or when I bailed her out of that disastrous Airbnb situation, or when I sent her just $500 until Friday that turned into radio silence for a month. No one called me then asking how I felt. 2 days passed before Bethany made her next move. She appeared outside our apartment building, and Emily spotted her through the peephole. When Emily cracked the door open, Bethany didn't even bother with pleasantries. "I need to talk to him," she demanded. "I have 5 days to pay rent, and I've already spent my summer job money. I was counting on that tuition deposit. He can't just pull everything without warning." Emily told her I wasn't home, a lie, since I was sitting in the living room, but I wasn't interested in negotiating through a doorway. Not until I heard something resembling an apology, which clearly wasn't coming. Bethany left shouting about legal rights and moral obligations, but I'd already checked the lease documentation. As the primary account holder, I had every right to freeze the payments. She was just a listed resident with no financial authority. 3 more days of silence, then an email arrived with the subject line, "Are you seriously doing this?" Inside, Bethany had crafted a detailed breakdown of her upcoming expenses and a demand that I reinstate the tuition payment. She claimed that without my support, she'd have to drop out for the semester and face eviction, both outcomes that would apparently be entirely my fault. Then came the guilt trip, wrapped in pseudo-psychological language about how I'd ruined the wedding because she was overwhelmed, and how I should have understood that she was just reacting to my newfound financial success going to my head. She positioned herself as the victim of my success rather than the architect of her own consequences. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to Emily with a note, "Your turn to read the circus." That's when Bethany escalated. She returned to our apartment, this time waiting until Emily came home from work. She tried to slip in behind Emily through the building's security door, but Emily was ready for her. Without drama or theatrics, Emily grabbed Bethany's arm, dragged her back into the hallway, and made it crystal clear that any repeat performance would result in a police call. When Bethany kept protesting, Emily grabbed a handful of her perfectly styled hair and physically guided her down the hall with the kind of matter-of-fact force you'd use to remove a persistent salesperson. Bethany shrieked and stumbled, but Emily didn't even flinch. She shut our door, engaged the deadbolt, and went about her evening like she'd just taken out the trash. 10 minutes later, my father called. "Look," he began with a heavy sigh. "We need to talk about your sister. She's spiraling, and she needs you to help her land. What happened at the wedding was just emotions getting the better of her. You shouldn't take it personally. You're old enough now to be the bigger person." I told him I'd been the bigger person for years. He countered that I shouldn't punish her for one bad moment. I explained that it wasn't a moment, it was a pattern. When he started lecturing me about family unity, I hung up. That's when I realized something none of them had admitted yet. Bethany wasn't spiraling. She was finally experiencing the consequences of her choices, and they were calling it a crisis because it was unfamiliar territory. After Emily physically ejected Bethany from our hallway, we didn't dissect the incident immediately. We just sat on the couch with wine, letting the quiet settle around us. But I could feel something shift between us, not in a bad way, but like Emily had drawn a boundary line in permanent ink, and now we both knew exactly where she stood. Bethany didn't attempt another surprise visit, but she didn't give up either. She started texting Emily instead of me, apologies wrapped in guilt trips, paragraphs that pretended to be mature but always concluded with some variation of "he owes me." Emily ignored them all and blocked the number after message 4. So Bethany pivoted to our parents, telling them she was being physically attacked and treated like a stray dog by Emily. She painted herself as someone who'd come to reconcile and been assaulted instead. That's when my father created a group chat. He added me, Emily, my mother, and Bethany to one chaotic digital space and typed, "Let's have an honest conversation without yelling or blocking. We're still a family." Bethany jumped in immediately, claiming she was hurt and had acted out at the wedding because she felt invisible and forgotten. She accused me of rubbing my success in her face for years. My mother chimed in next, urging me to move forward and forgive, because Bethany was still finding herself. Her message ended with, "She's still your baby sister." Emily left the group chat immediately. I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed exactly 3 sentences, "She's not a baby. She's 22 years old and needs to learn that actions have consequences. I'm done subsidizing her poor choices." Radio silence followed. No responses, no typing indicators, just that peculiar digital tension that feels louder than actual shouting. 2 days later, my cousin informed me that Bethany had packed up and abandoned her apartment. She couldn't make rent, couldn't find a subletter, and had simply walked away. The lease company contacted me for final documentation, which I signed without resistance, ensuring my credit remained intact. But the real revelation came a week later. Bethany had re-enrolled in school. Not under my financial backing, but under my parents'. They'd quietly paid her tuition out of their own accounts, after months of complaining about tight finances and how they couldn't provide the same opportunities I'd had. So they'd had the money all along. They just preferred pressuring me to spend mine rather than dipping into their own resources. That was my breaking point. Not anger, clarity. I wasn't upset anymore. I was simply done. Emily and I sat on our balcony that evening with cheap wine and leftover takeout, and I told her it felt like a decade-long weight had been cut loose from my shoulders. She smiled and said, "Good. Now we can actually live." For the first time, I believed her completely. About a week after Bethany officially vacated her apartment, an unusual calm settled over our lives. No angry texts, no surprise visits, no crisis calls. I'd almost started to believe the storm had passed when my mother called. No greeting, no small talk, just, "You'll be at your father's birthday next Saturday, right?" Like nothing had happened. Like my wedding hadn't been sabotaged. Like my sister hadn't spent months treating me like her personal ATM before publicly humiliating me and Emily in front of our closest friends and family. I said I wasn't sure about attending. She paused, then delivered the kicker. "Bethany will be there." I want you two to talk like adults, and I want you to stop being so cold toward her. That was rich. I was the cold one. Not the person who destroyed my wedding cake and screamed at me in front of 43 guests. Not the person who'd been leeching off me financially for 3 years. The person who finally said, enough, was the problem. I hung up without committing to anything. Emily and I discussed it over dinner that night and agreed we wouldn't attend. Then, on Friday evening, the night before the party, something truly absurd happened. Bethany sent me a Venmo request for $1,800 with the description, for the cake and broken frame. LOL, let's call it even. I was so stunned I couldn't even react. I just handed my phone to Emily and walked out to the balcony for air. When I returned, Emily had the calmest expression on her face. What did you write back? I asked. She shrugged. She's not going to like it. 15 minutes later, Bethany blocked both of us on every social media platform. We skipped my father's birthday party, but Bethany didn't. According to my cousin Cara, who texted us photos, Bethany showed up in a white jumpsuit that looked suspiciously bridal, accompanied by some real estate agent she'd apparently met 2 weeks earlier. She spent the evening telling half the guests they were moving in together soon, and the other half that big things are coming. She kept repeating that phrase, big things are coming. The following Monday, we discovered what the big thing was. Bethany had launched a podcast called Bloodline Bruises, Growing Up with the Golden Child. The trailer dropped on Instagram and TikTok with her voice dramatically intoning lines like, I thought family meant safety, and sometimes the most toxic people are the ones you share a last name with. It was so theatrical it felt scripted, but she wasn't finished. At the end of the video, she thanked her sponsor, a therapy app that I'd actually recommended to her a year earlier when she'd called me from a bar bathroom having a panic attack. She'd managed to secure a legitimate sponsorship deal, and they reposted her content. Within 24 hours, she had over 10,000 views. The comments section was exactly what you'd expect. People calling her brave, asking for advice, sharing their own family drama. I wasn't particularly bothered by the podcast itself, but something about it felt unsettling, like I was slowly being written into someone else's fictional narrative without my consent. Then came the twist I never anticipated. She emailed me with the subject line, "Let's talk." The message was brief and surprisingly composed. I'd like to meet. No drama, just a conversation. I have things I want to tell you. I think you'll be proud of me. The tone was completely unlike her. No accusations, no demands, just calm, perfectly controlled language. It didn't sound like Bethany at all. Emily read it twice and said, she's not trying to reconcile. She's setting up something. I replied with one line, Emily will be there too. Bethany never responded. 3 days after that email, my parents appeared at our apartment unannounced. No call, no warning, they simply rang the bell at 7:15 p.m. while Emily and I were eating dinner. I opened the door halfway without speaking. My father gave a little wave like this was a casual social visit. My mother had her purse positioned like she'd been planning to stay a while. We just want to talk calmly, she said. I told them they had 3 minutes. They walked in anyway. Emily remained in the kitchen with her arms crossed, making it clear she wasn't going to pretend this was a pleasant family gathering. My mother went first, explaining that Bethany was going through a transformative period, and had made mistakes she regrets deeply. The podcast, she claimed, was just Bethany's way of processing her feelings, and I shouldn't take it so personally. My father added that Bethany wanted a relationship with me but didn't know how to ask for it. I asked if Bethany had actually said any of that, or if they were just hoping I'd believe it. They didn't answer. Then my mother dropped the real bombshell. She's moved back in with us temporarily, just until she figures things out. Emily let out an audible breath. The picture was suddenly complete. They'd paid her tuition, let her move back home, and were now here not to ask me for anything, but to ensure I wouldn't make their lives more difficult. They weren't mediating, they were managing the situation to their advantage. I asked them directly, have either of you ever told her that what she did at my wedding was wrong? My mother said Bethany was overwhelmed. My father said she didn't mean to ruin anything. I asked again, did either of you explicitly tell her that her behavior was wrong? Silence. That told me everything I needed to know. They weren't angry at Bethany, they were embarrassed by her. And the easiest way to eliminate their embarrassment was to pressure me into pretending it never happened. I told them I was finished with the financial support, the guilt trips, and the emotional manipulation. If they wanted to keep funding Bethany's lifestyle, that was their choice, but I was permanently out of that equation. I said they'd done an excellent job raising a daughter who believes consequences don't apply to her. Then I asked them to leave. They hesitated, but eventually complied. Bethany didn't contact me after that visit, but her podcast continued. Episode 2 was about narcissistic siblings. Episode 3 was titled, When They Make You Look Crazy. Emily and I actually laughed at that one. A few days later, I examined our apartment lease and realized we had 8 months remaining. I looked at our savings account, ran some calculations, and suggested to Emily that we take a real vacation. Somewhere far away, somewhere warm, somewhere that had nothing to do with family drama. She smiled immediately. The next morning, we booked round-trip flights to the Maldives. We were leaving in 6 weeks. The last message I received from Bethany came 2 days before our departure. Just a fire emoji. No words, no context, maybe a vague threat, maybe just a reminder that she was still watching. I showed Emily while we were picking up luggage tags at the airport. She barely glanced at it, scanned her boarding pass, and said, "Perfect. Let it burn." I blocked the number immediately. That was the final loose thread. My father didn't call. My mother sent one generic, "Hope you're well," text that I ignored. No more lectures, no more guilt trips. I think they finally understood that I wasn't going to be the one to fix what they'd broken. We left for the Maldives on a Thursday morning. Direct flight, no layovers, no rush. I watched Emily sleep against the window as we crossed thousands of miles of open ocean, and for the first time in years, my mind wasn't racing. No financial calculations, no rescue plans, no crisis management, just silence. Our overwater bungalow was literally suspended above the ocean. You could hear waves lapping beneath the floorboards. There was a sign posted inside, "No clocks. Let time be yours again." That hit me harder than it should have. We didn't mention Bethany once. Not until day 4, when we were having breakfast on the deck with nothing but ocean sounds and bird calls around us. Emily asked, "Do you think they'll ever admit what really happened?" I didn't need clarification about who she meant. "No," I said. "But I think they know. Maybe not consciously, but they understand what they lost when they chose her chaos over my peace. They knew I'd always been the one managing Bethany's messes. They knew they'd allowed it because it was easier than establishing boundaries. And they definitely knew they couldn't reach for me that way anymore. Bethany stayed with our parents. She never found a new apartment. Her old lease expired and the building relisted the unit without issue. The management company contacted me for final signature confirmation, which I provided. She never reached out about it, never said thank you, never apologized. She never will, but I've stopped waiting for that. I don't need her apology anymore. I just needed it to end. The podcast continued for 2 more episodes, one about being erased by your support system, another about financial abuse within families. I didn't listen, but Kara did. She said Bethany was stretching reality so far it stopped making sense. People stopped engaging, comments slowed to a trickle, and the sponsorship disappeared. After that, genuine silence. Not just digital quiet, but real-life peace. I stopped checking her social media. My mother stopped sending passive-aggressive group texts. My father didn't mention Bethany during his one call asking about a car mechanic recommendation. Eventually, Kara mentioned that Bethany had enrolled in part-time classes again, funded by my parents this time. Apparently, they dipped into an emergency fund they'd been saving for years. I almost laughed. They'd had the money all along, they just hadn't wanted to use it until I refused to be their intermediary. Emily and I returned home to a completely different version of life. We moved to a better place further from the city, closer to actual quiet. No more buzzing phones, no more split payments, just us. I got a new credit card without any co-signers. I even changed my bank account password for the first time in 6 years. No more surprise withdrawals or Venmo requests labeled, "Please don't ask." We don't talk about the wedding anymore. We don't need to. It's just a strange blip in a story that no longer belongs to us. Some evenings we sit on our new porch with wine, watching the neighbor's dog chase moths under the porch light, and we talk about real things. Books we want to read, trips we want to take, the business Emily's planning to start.